how did we get there? And the answer is, I just told you. The moment we landed, we saw everything as, how can I transfer wealth from those people into my pocket? Everything became a ruthless transaction where we dehumanize the other side. Think about the cruelty of stealing land from a family that's farming, and then the cruelty of kidnapping a person and dragging them across the Atlantic in chains, where a huge portion of them will just die at sea. And then you stick them into a position where there's no possibility for them to better their lives. They just serve you so that you can steal their labor. To make things even weirder, the crops we wanted to grow, tobacco and cotton, are also land intensive, not just labor intensive. They wreck the soil and they wreck it really fast. So, if the land, they didn't have the technology to protect the land, it meant we had to go west. The necessity of going west was an economic imperative if we're going to maintain the system. This idea that we needed to go to the Pacific was built into the moment we started growing tobacco and cotton, because we were wrecking the soil. And so that's what we did. We just kept going west. We'll trigger wars, right? George Washington all but starts the 7 Years' War that lasted 9 years and is also called the French and Indian War, that kills 1 million people and is fought in every ocean on the planet and was global. Like, there's a land war in Europe. The reason he starts the war is because he wants Kentucky so he can grow tobacco, because his family was going bust. They were growing hemp, but they just didn't care to grow hemp. They wanted tobacco. Tobacco's where the money was at. And so they needed to go west. They wanted to get into Kentucky. To end the 7 Years' War, because see, the Brits didn't win it militarily in the beginning. They were in serious trouble. They were losing. Queen Elizabeth I's dream was on the verge of ending right then and there. The 13 colonies were going to get wiped out. So the Brits had to make a deal with the Native Americans called the Royal Proclamation of 1763. The Royal Proclamation of 1763 prohibited colonists from crossing the Appalachian Mountains and going west. Well, for those of you who went to American public schools, Kentucky is west. In other words, Washington starts a war to get Kentucky. The Brits don't really win, but they do win. They win it by making a deal with the Native Americans that will prohibit Washington and people like him from going to Kentucky. In that moment, they planted the seeds of the revolution. Because in that moment then, the southern plantation owners are host. How are they going to get to the land that's west of the Appalachians as long as the Royal Proclamation of 1763 is in place? So, they're angry. They start trying to come up with a way to get rid of this Royal Proclamation. And then the commoners provide them the source. Long story short, commoners are mad because the English Bill of Rights guarantees you representation in Parliament if you're taxed. So George III needs to collect taxes from the colonies, not because England was going to make a lot of money off those taxes. Those taxes were really light. The tea tax is my favorite. Okay, so let's say we do, in today dollars, 5 cents per tea bag in tax? How much tea are you drinking? Like if you drink 2 tea bags worth of tea a day, that's 10 cents a day, that's $36.50 a year. You're going to start a revolution because you're mad about a $36 tax? Once the commoners are upset because they don't have representation in Parliament, it's just a matter of time before the elites realize they have a way to break the Royal Proclamation. Now think about this. You or your family members came over, you got land that wasn't yours, you got labor that wasn't yours, that you didn't really pay for. You're making money off of cotton, which is nice, or tobacco, which is evil. You're wrecking the soil, but you're still filthy rich. Even if you're growing hemp because you can't grow tobacco because you've wrecked the soil, you're living off of your inheritance. It's not like you're working hard. It's not like your life is hard and mean. So even the colonists who are upset about not having representation in Parliament, that's an ego thing at that point. Who cares? What were we going to get? Three representatives per colony? There were 17, not 13 at that moment. So what would that have been? 51 people added to a body of 600? Or were we going to get 2 representatives per colony? Like, it wasn't going to have a meaningful impact on the types of laws being generated in England. It wasn't going to affect your day-to-day life very much. In other words, we got really mad about something that symbolically was important to us, but in reality wasn't going to have a big impact on us. And then the elites used that anger to turn the revolution from a revolution to fight for our English rights into a revolution for independence, because the United States of America doesn't have to pay attention to the Royal Proclamation of 1763. We can cancel it, slaughter the Native Americans, take Kentucky, bring tobacco and slaves over, and begin the process again until we destroy Kentucky. And then I guess we have to move to Missouri and do it to Missouri. And then they didn't know how far west they could go because they didn't realize you probably aren't going to grow much tobacco in Kansas. But that was the dream, was to grow tobacco all the way to Alaska and California. Just keep going west, right through the Rocky Mountains. In other words, what we've got now is a transactional society that now views other people as a means for generating wealth, which is, of course, the foundation of capitalism. Instead of seeing another person as a person who's a member of your community, you see the other person as an opportunity to make a profit. And that, of course, creates this transactional society that we've become a part of and that we're familiar with. So there's an irony of all of this. Adam Smith writes The Wealth of Nations. The Wealth of Nations is, right, the book that codifies the birth of capitalism. It's published in 1776. It's not a coincidence. Our birth and the birth of capitalism are inextricably tied together. The way we design the Constitution reflects that. By the time we get through the Constitution, it is clear that our objective, Madison says this, it is clear that our objective is to create a hierarchical society. It was their objective from the beginning. John Locke, the Scottish philosopher who wrote the Second Treatise on Government, the guy who wrote the English Bill of Rights, he's the author of the Constitution of the Carolinas, when the Carolinas were being established by royal charter. When he wrote that Constitution, he doesn't just add slavery into it, he made it so that it was all but impossible to ever abolish it. We made it so that we're going to create an electoral republic. Think about the mechanism here. When you run for office, you can be campaign financed. You receive money, and then you take that money and you use it on your campaign to get elected. In other words, if you don't do what your donors want you to do, in 2 years, they're going to fund somebody else, and that money isn't going to be used by you to get elected. It's going to be used by an opponent of yours to take you out. So at that point now, as a politician, you've become captive to your donors. In other words, what we did by creating an electoral republic is we gave the merchants the reins. We gave the rich the reins because they campaign finance the politicians. And they can take out politicians by campaign financing their opponents. And that became our political system. So the laws that we generated were laws that were generated to benefit the rich by design. Madison says it in a letter to his friend. He says, I designed a constitution that would leave the power in the hands of the rich. Don't worry. Support this thing.